cloud. All of you know that we are celebrating. We're not, I mean, whatever I should say differently. We are hitting onto, we're coming onto the 24th. Today was the 24th, and tomorrow will be the 25th of December. And so you may be aware that these dates represent a certain Christian holiday, which Jews do not celebrate often, or Jews don't celebrate at all. And that said, there is a Kabbalistic teaching. Believe it or not, there is a Kabbalistic teaching that tells us that one should not study Torah on the 24th of December at night. On the eve of this holiday, one should not study Torah. And the simple explanation, of course, is that that's right, you can close your books. That's right, we're not going to study Torah. The simple explanation is that there is certain energies that are being understand it as certain holy energies that are being diverted from going to their holy destinations. They're going to unholy destinations on this evening. And as such, it is not the Jewish custom to not study Torah tonight, and so we won't. But how can we break up a class 2 weeks in a row? I had to log on, and I had to prepare something for everybody to join us, and so we will. That said, I'll share with you a couple of stories, and then I would like to actually, we're going to drop the stories because of the time, and I want to tell you guys about the Chabad dynasty. And why do I find the need to share this with you all tonight? Because we're coming up to, how do we say this? As I teach, and as we spend time together, and as we learn together, we are going to discover many things, and I'm going to use like a glossary of terms that you may or may not be accustomed to. And so I think that an introductory lesson where we can go through some of these terms, so that when I say them, you already know what I'm talking about, kind of puts us all ahead of the game. So here goes. Chabad, spelled Chabad, is actually an acronym. It's an acronym. It has 3 Hebrew letters, Ches, Beis, Dalid, and each one of those letters begins another word. Ches begins the word Chochma, Beis begins the word Bina, and Dalid begins the word Das. Chochma, Bina, Das. What are these 3 words that I said in Hebrew, and that you have to know what they mean? So Chochma, spelled in English Chochma, Chochma is knowledge. It's that moment of knowledge, of inspiration, of a brand new idea, knowing something that you didn't know before, and like being amazed that, wow, what a fantastic concept this is going to be. Bina is when you take that idea, it's spelled B-I-N-A, and when you take the idea that you've got and you develop it into a concept. The last one is Das, D-A-A-S or D-A-S, depending on how you spell it and which website you're reading, which books you're reading from. And Das is a new manifestation of understanding. It's when your understanding influences your behavior and influences your lifestyle. So why does a Jewish movement choose to name itself using these 3 cognitive levels? And that's a question that I'd like to open the floor to. If somebody would like to give a go at suggesting an answer for this, I'm giving you about 30 seconds while I say L'chaim. How come nobody wants to give a go? Come on. It's a small community. You guys can chat.
Will you repeat, please, what the Chachma and Bina stand for?
Yes, yes, I will. Chachma is the spark of knowledge. So think back to an innovative moment in your life where you had an issue and you needed to solve it, and you finally had that what we call in Yiddish a chap. You caught something. You're like, oh, what a fantastic idea! Right, and this is how I'm going to solve all those problems. That's your moment of chachma. For the etymologically inclined, and those who get to study with me know that I love the study of language and words. So you will know, you will be delighted to hear that chachma is a development of two words, koyach and ma. Koyach means the power of, and ma means what. So chachma and koyach ma are connected, and if I'm going to be so brave, I will put that up. I will write it out so that you guys can see how that makes sense. Let me see if I can do this quickly. I should share my screen immediately so you don't get bored while I'm doing this, right? We don't want you guys bored, especially on my bill. Share. Can you see my page over here? Let's zoom in a bit. Okay, so that's the Hebrew letters koyach, right? And ma. Those are those letters. But you're wondering how do you get from koyach to chachma? So it's spelled like this. Okay, chachma. Chachma is a. Now it should be big enough for you not to have to strain your eyes. So you can see here that chachma is the ches chaf over there is koyach, and the ma is over there, right? And they mean. Let's see if we can do this in English. Hey, what are we writing in? No. The power of what? Okay, so that's chachma. Okay, hold on to that vision because in a moment I'm going to unshare my screen because I'd like to see you. I like to see you too. So that's chachma, and bina is the development of understanding. Okay. If it wouldn't be the night of the 24th, I would tell you that often we compare these three levels to the gestation of a child, the stages in pregnancy. Chokhmah is the conception of a child. Bina is the 9 months of pregnancy where the womb of the mother is developing the child. And Das is that happy day which you mark as your birthday. Robert, please ask a question. I can see it on your nose.
Just an observation. I don't know if this was any part of the motivation for choosing the name Chabad, but in the first of the petitionary blessings in the weekday Amidah, one asks for two of those three. One asks God for two, at least two of those three are mentioned there.
So you are right. Not only are you right, but here's my handy dandy siddur, and I'm just pulling out the page here, and I'm pretty sure that in the Chabad siddur we actually include the third one.
Ooh.
Yeah, in the third siddur, in the Chabad siddur we include the third one. Chachma, Bina, and Das are all included in there, and I see that Juan is going to get his Chabad siddur too. And if you don't have a Chabad siddur, I advise you get one because this is the ultimate prayer book of all time. Okay. Now, if I was, I don't know. I don't think we have all a unit. Hey, welcome on. Someone just joined us, and I'm delighted to say she's joined us from Australia. So welcome. Welcome to my darling sister. Hello, Chana. And okay, so you guys are finding in the third blessing you have the last three words before the Baruch Atah Hashem, it says Chachma, Bina, and Das right there. Okay, so you got it. So that's that. But as we said, since it's the night of the 24th, we're not going to learn Torah, so we won't get too deep in that. But what we will do, we'll continue on with the conversation. So we've named the organization Chabad. Why? And the simple answer is because Chabad is an intellectual experience, and it ends with an emotional and practical engagement. Every single day, a person who engages in Chabad is meant to cognitively connect with God, develop that connection in a experience of meditation and contemplation, and finally pray. And in that moment of prayer, and in continuing your day while connecting to God, that is how in our souls, that is how as people we employ Chabad to connect with God. And as such, that is now you can already understand why, for example, why does Chabad have this strong need to print the Tanya in every town in the world where Jews live, which by the way, we printed in four towns across the state of Georgia. This Hanukkah, we printed a Tanya, and one of them was deliberately chosen to be in the town of Milledgeville. And it was printed in Milledgeville on the second to last night of Hanukkah, and soon the residents of Milledgeville will have a dedication ceremony, and we will give you guys a copy. In the meanwhile, so now we know the basics of why the organization is named as such and what that means to us. Does anybody have a question or a comment on the above before I move on to level 2 of today's conversation? Laura, go for it.
So is it called Chabad because it's like the birth of a new movement?
Okay, that's a good question. I will answer that question as follows. Chabad, although we call it a movement, is actually the leaders of Chabad have told us that it's not a movement. It's actually not a movement at all. It's actually the Chabad is not a movement as much as it's a lifestyle. It's a way of living that everybody can experience, right? And so, some of us have had conversations about community engagement with Chabad, right? And so people say, hey, what do you mean? They're Chabad, they're different. And in truth, Chabad is just a lifestyle. It's a way of living. Some people live the Vogue lifestyle. Some people live the bourgeois lifestyle. And other people get to live the Chabad lifestyle. It's a choice in life that people make. And I'm going to suggest it's a lifestyle and a bit of a culture. And the culture is based on intellectual stimulation and emotional connection. And that's why, by the way, if you searched Chabad online, you might have discovered that Chabad is famous for mitzvah tanks. And those are these massive RV trucks that roll around typically bigger cities like New York and LA and others, where they have rabbis on board who will help Jews do mitzvahs. And some Jews think, well, that's a bit extra. Why spend so much time on mitzvahs? Why don't you do other stuff? And the simple answer is because Chabad believes, the concept of Chabad is that you intellectually arrive at the outcome of behavior. And so, but what's most important is the behavior. So let's grab you and get you involved in a behavior, and we can discuss and learn from there how to do more. Okay, so Laura, you asked you asked the movement of Chabad was something, and I went into this. Laura, can you remind me what you asked?
You were asking why do we think it's named Chabad?
Yeah.
And then you described what each letter in the acronym means, and then used the analogy of basically conception to birth. So it seemed like the birth of something new. I guess
new movement.
the birth of a new movement, the birth
Yes.
of a new lifestyle.
So what I attempted was, which I forgot to continue on with, was that Chabad is not a new movement. Rather, it's an adaptation of how to live, right? We want instead of having a intellectual and emotional and behavioral disconnect, which means that what your intellect tells you to do and your emotions tell you to do is not connected, and it definitely doesn't follow through to how you actually behave. Chabad teaches that from the beginning, you should be completely motivated the whole way through, brain, heart, and into action, all deliberately. You plan it out in a Torah fashion, right? So new movement, I don't think so. Some might disagree with me, but definitely a movement focused on behavior and thing. And so, as I said, that's a reason why the movement is called Chabad, because it's intellectually stimulated, as we said. Okay, moving on to part 2 of our conversation is Chabad. This lifestyle is actually taught by what we call a Rebbe. Now, for the purpose of that, let's just write out the word. Actually, whatever. You don't have to. Rebbe is spelled R-E-B-B-E, typically Rebbe, and a Rebbe is a Hasidic master or a leader, and from the beginning of the Hasidic movement with the Baal Shem Tov, there have been hundreds of different flavors of a Rebbe. However, the Chabad movement has 7 Rebbes, 7 beginning from the first all the way through the current, who is pictured right behind me. If you see this picture, that's the 7th Rebbe right there, and it's a nice print of a painting. I think we'll all agree. And I think my father was present when that photo was taken, I think. But that's just a random piece of information. So what I'd like to do is go through each of the 7 Rebbes and show you a picture and tell you something about them. I'll tell you their name, and I'll tell you where they lived and something they're famous for. Sounds fun? So let's play. Rebbe number 1. The first Rebbe, he was called the Alter Rebbe, or A-L-T-E-R, Alter, and that means old, simply, the old Rebbe. And the old Rebbe, open image in new tab, here we go. Oh, it's not such a good picture. The old Rebbe, so-called because he was the first of all the Rebbes. Okay, this painting that I've uploaded here was drawn of the Alter Rebbe while he was incarcerated by the Tsarist government in the 1700s, something like that. I guess that would be the 18th century, if I'm correct in my numbers. He is famous for authoring a bunch of very seminal works. So the number one thing he's famous for is the Tanya. And I'm going to ask Juan if you could get up and pull your Tanya off the shelf and show us all your copy of the Tanya. Oh, Juan seems to be busy. Okay, drop that. So the Tanya is one of those books the Alter Rebbe rewrote. The Alter Rebbe rewrote the Shulchan Aruch, and I discussed that with Robert a couple days ago in our class. This is a copy of the Shulchan Aruch, and it's all in Hebrew. In this case, there are translated versions. If you want a link to the translated version, let me know. And the Alter Rebbe authored these books. In addition, he also put out a new version of the Siddur. And when I say new version, he went through 63 different texts of the Siddur and chose the most grammatically correct and the most Kabbalistically correct version and printed it into what we call today the Siddur Tehillas Hashem, which I think Juan has a copy of. And this one is called the Siddur Torah Or, right? That's Juan Siddur over there, Tehillas Hashem. This is the Torah Or, which is a development of the same text and has a lot more, it's just set up differently. It's a bit of a different typesetting. And okay, and so now I'll tell you something famous about him. In addition to all that he's done, the Alter Rebbe was the first of the Chabad dynasty, and so he had to really begin a whole new movement, that was developed differently from his predecessors. His predecessors were focused a lot on the emotional side of things, and the Alter Rebbe insisted that every person has to be capable of using their own intellect to push through it till the final action. And so he began Chabad. Robert has a question, go for it.
So does Hasidism precede Chabad? I'm trying to understand the relationship between the two. Is that what Hasidism?
I love that question. I love the question. Yes, Hasidism does precede Chabad in concept. And in fact, you will find in the Talmud mention of Hasidim. The Gemara speaks about Hasidim. And it says that a Hasid, it says Hasidim Harishonim, the first Hasidim would prepare themselves for an hour, and then they would pray for an hour, and then they would perhaps call it wind down for an hour after their prayers every day. So Hasidim have always been known as praying people, perhaps. Another interesting thing that the Gemara says about the Chassid is that he is so righteous, he burns his fingernails. Okay, go figure. Why do you think a Chassid might burn his fingernails? Any guess? Give us a wild guess, a wild one.
The fingernail clippings cannot be used in some immoral or unreligious, non-religious act.
Okay, good. So I think you're very close to what I was going to say. Does somebody else want to give us a good one?
Not to deface or otherwise damage the Torah scroll when it's open.
Interesting. Why would you burn your fingernails in protection of a Torah scroll? Okay. Nevertheless, here's an idea. The idea is that the Torah, the Talmud tells us that if a pregnant woman were to step on a fingernail, she would get such a shock that she would lose her pregnancy. And that's on a very practical level. And on a spiritual level, there is some connection that I do not completely understand between stepping over a cut off fingernail and a woman losing her pregnancy. So it's not just a physical experience of a shock, there's also a Kabbalistic connection. And perhaps the connection is that the fingernail is a representation of death, right? Because it's live cells that have been cut off. And so now they're no longer alive. And pregnant, they're alive.
Before, just to clarify, so Hasidism then, that's perhaps focuses more on emotional matters, and Chabad is swinging the pendulum back more to the intellectual. Is that a fair statement?
So bringing us back to the real topic of conversation, Robert is 100% correct in his suggestion that many other groups of Hasidism focus entirely on emotion and behavior. And Chabad said we can't rely on others to do the intellectual work for us. We've got to be able to do it on our own. And so when you would compare no, hair clippings are not seen the same way at all, but toenails are seen that way. When you would compare the old, the other Hasidic communities to Chabad focuses in a very extreme way on contemplation, on a level of meditation, of study, and on prayer. While in other Hasidic communities, the focus is not very much on any of those three, but rather on a culture, on doing things. Okay, and so Robert, that was really good. So since the Alter Rebbe was trying to swing the pendulum in a different direction, so he really pulled off a very different and new kind of lifestyle, to the extent that many of the students of his teacher disagreed with him, and there was even a group of Jews who were so virulently against what he was teaching that they spread false libels about him until he was incarcerated. And that brings us back to the picture that I posted. He was incarcerated for 53 days until he was finally released. And during that time, this picture was taken. And as we get a chance to look at the picture again, I'd like to tell you a story that's connected with this picture. The Alter Rebbe was in prison, and it became well known that this great and righteous and genius of a man was in jail. So many of the intellectuals of the Russian government wanted to meet him. One of these people did come to visit him, and he came and he asked the Alter Rebbe a question as follows. There is a verse in Genesis, in Bereshis, right at the beginning, after Chava, the wife of Adam Arishon, the first man, they call her Eve. After Chava eats and gives her husband to eat, they recognize their nakedness and they hide. And God comes out and he says the Hebrew words, Ayeka, where are you? So I was actually just reading a book last night, something about Tikkun Olam, and someone said that the question Ayeka is the question of how come you're not healing the world yet? But the Hasidic idea of this question is, so this man asked the Alter Rebbe, what does Ayeka mean? God for sure knows where Adam is. How hard can it be to find Adam in a world with only one person, with two people? There's Adam and Chava. How can God not know where he is, especially since he lives in the Garden of Eden? Right? And that's only if you're already having a hard time seeing God as a finite being that lives in a specific location where you can only see as far as his nose goes. But God is not like that at all. And so the question really is, what's God looking for when he says, where are you? And as such, the Alter Rebbe answered him that the question of Ayeka is more than just where are you physically, but rather it's a question that each of us need to ask ourselves. The question is, where are you in your service? Where are you in your relationships? Where are you is not just where are you right now, it's where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you focused on? What's your drive? What's your goal? What's boiling your kettle? And as it happens, the warden or whoever this officer was delighted with the answer. And I don't know if he helped the Alter Rebbe get out of jail, but there goes the story. And that also, I just taught you something on this night when we're not meant to study anything. So I hope that you don't strike me down with a lightning rod. Okay, that's the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe is also famous for 10 songs, of which one of them is considered to be a very holy song. In the Hasidic lexicon, we call a song a nigun, Niggun, nigun. And if you take a moment, you can even do it now, but don't play it now. You can go into Google and search Alter Rebbe, Alter, Rebbe, Rebbe, nigun, Niggun, and then you can and you will find recordings of his songs, of which if you continue to Google search the wedding song by the Alter Rebbe or something with that, you will find a heart string pulling song which is considered to be very holy. In addition, there were 9 other songs that he composed himself, and that's it. I will tell you another story of the Alter Rebbe, and I fear we may not manage to talk much about the other members of the dynasty, but we'll get there one day. Another story is that the Alter Rebbe lived in the province, I think it's the province of Mogilev, Moghilev. So for the Russians amongst us, that might be just me. That's an area somewhere in White Russia, and the how do you call it? The poets. What's the English word for poets? The governor of the area had a obviously he owned a lot of land. In his land there was a forest, and there was also a sun clock. Is that the correct word? A sundial. He had a sundial, and he was very excited about his sundial, and so he invited his his friends from the elite to come check out his sundial. And they arrived, and they're looking at the sundial, and they said, "Hey, your sundial is off. It's off. It's not telling the right time." And after a few days of studying it, they discovered that for a certain 2-hour period in the afternoon, it turned off. It would not work properly. And they were all very surprised, but they didn't know what to do about it. Until one of them said, "I have in my country, in my area, in my specific land, there is this great rabbi who has answers to all of life's problems. Why don't you bring him here and ask him to check this out?" And so they did. They brought the Alter Rebbe to come check the sundial, and without thinking too hard, he said, X amount of miles southwest of here, or whichever direction, there is a forest, and the trees have grown too high. If you will lop off the top meter or two of those trees, you will discover that your sundial will resume working. And so the governor laughed. He thought, well, that's incredulous. Why should the growth of trees impede on my sundial? And so he sent the rabbi home, and his sundial continued not to work. In the meanwhile, one of the other members of this society thought it would be worth investigating, and he went to find the forest, and he went and took down the top couple meters or whatever of this tree, and he came back the next day to see if the sundial would work, and so it did. And obviously it's not too hard for us to understand that the sunlight was being blocked by the shadows of these trees X amount of miles away in whichever direction. And that was, that kind of tells you about the wisdom and the genius of this rabbi. In addition to all the great other achievements that he's done, this is one of the many other lovely things we can tell about him. So that's Rebbe number 1. Typically, this class goes for about an hour, and it's already 6:47. So I'm going to give you another, 5 to 10 minutes on the next Rebbe. And so you're going to tell me, hey, the next Rebbe doesn't have a picture. And you're right. There was never any reason for his portrait to be taken. And so there is no picture of the second Chabad Rebbe, whose name was Doiv Ber. And he was born on the 10th of Teves, and the year I've forgotten, but that's okay. You'll forgive me, hopefully. He was born on the 10th of Teves, which, by the way, happened just a couple of weeks ago. And since then, and he lived, I don't know, probably for 50 years or so. And he lived the entire time in a town called Lubavitch, Lubavitch, Lubavitch. And if you've read any of the biographies on Chabad, you will have discovered that the name Chabad is always adjoined to the name Lubavitch, which is the name of this I guess call it a movement, but we don't want to use that term, right? Okay, so what happens next? So this Rebbe, he is famous for a couple of different things. First of all, he's famous for lecturing for 24 hours straight. Okay, isn't that fantastic? So his entire life was the study and practice of this intellectual experience called Chabad. And so as a teacher, he would teach as often as he could, for as long as he could. In fact, I'm going to tell you a story that will blow your feet off. It's good to see you all sitting down. He was approached by his father and told that we have a shidduch proposition and an option for you to get married. And so he said, do you prefer between A or B? And so the Rebbe said, it's you pick whichever one, just make it happen quick. Right? Surprise, surprise. I found that to be a surprising response. But he then explained that the reason he wanted it to happen far sooner was not because he needed to get married, as much as he was desperate to hear the Hasidic teachings that would certainly be told over at his wedding celebration. And that was his focus. In fact, another story is that as the son of the Alter Rebbe, his entire life was the study of Hasidus. And it happened that for a period of time, he wasn't able to be present at his father's teaching sessions. And he was having withdrawal symptoms from learning Hasidus, and to the extent that he fell ill. So his mother went to the Alter Rebbe and said, hey, our son is unwell. You pray for everybody else, pray for him too. And so the Alter Rebbe said, look, he's not unwell from anything unhealthy. He's simply unwell from not having heard Hasidus. Tell him that I will come and deliver a teaching to him personally, and you will see that he will improve. And so it was, as soon as his mother told him that he was going to get a private session of Hasidus study from his father, his health situation improved greatly until he was totally back to everything regular. Something famous about the second Chabad Rebbe is what we call the Kherson agricultural efforts. And that is, Kherson, spelled Kherson, is somewhere deep in Ukraine. And it's a many-day travel away from the headquartered village of Lubavitch. And at the time, there was the law of Pale, or something like that. And you can check it up on Google, the PAIL law, which restricted the Jews from living in big cities and on the borders. Seems like Linda knows about this. Okay? And so what happens, so the Jews are now being restricted from where they can live by the Tsar of blessed memory. And so the Rebbe thinks of a way how he can provide for the Hasidim. He figured that he would buy land. It was bought with communal funds, but he figured that he would buy land in the distant area of Kherson, where the Jews would create communes of agricultural lifestyle, and they would live there and live off the land. it was a very effective method of providing providing parnasa, livelihood for the community. And in fact, it was populated for over 150 years until the Nazis, may the names be erased, came and wiped out that community too. Another interesting episode with the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, is that he was so divested from the world, he was so separated from the world, that it happened once that someone came to him and told him that he has fake money. What do you call it in America? Fake money. It's what is it called?
Yeah, counterfeit.
Counterfeit. He had counterfeit money on his table, which of course in Tsarist Russia would be a grave sin and punishable by death or who knows what. And the Rebbe knew that this was not a good thing to have, and so without thinking, he had no concept of the value of money. He couldn't understand how a physical item represented so much and meant so much to people, that he quickly took all of the money that was on his table and possibly counted up to be, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of rubles, and he threw it all into the fireplace, not taking into consideration the difference that some of them might be real and others might be counterfeit, and not everything is counterfeit. So engrossed in something other than this world was he. And that is part of the second Rebbe's lifestyle. The second Rebbe is known for having had a choir. He had a choir and a group of entertainers that would prance on horses. And this was called in Russian a kapelya, Kepelia, kapelya. And it was a unique group. And when this kapelya would either sing or do a display of on horse dances, it would assist the Rebbe, it seems to me, in attaining a level of contemplation or meditation that allowed him to think with another level of clarity or something like that. And I'm sure that this arouses questions, and I welcome those questions, but I cannot profess to know the answers because I don't know. But that's something about the second Rebbe as well. With that, I open the floor to questions, and then we will conclude. If anybody wants to ask something, go for it. Yes.
Is the succession of Rebbe's hereditary? Is it father to son?
Not only is the succession of Rebbe's hereditary, but many other things in the Jewish culture and lifestyle are also hereditary father to son. For example, the high priest, I'm pretty sure, is passed on father to son. And I think that's the first occasion of where it was passed on. And I will leave you with something quite fascinating. Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, wanted to pass on his position to his child, right? And in the end of the Torah, somewhere in the end of Deuteronomy, God tells him that he is not to pass it on to his own son, he's rather to pass it on to his student, Yehoshua. And so it's fascinating to see that already in the biblical times, Jews are passing things on father to son. Maybe it's called nepotism, I'm not sure, but definitely that's the way it was. But just to give a kind of explanation for why this is the case. And now, Robert, you've begun studying Tanya, so you will be familiar with the idea I'm about to express. Right at the beginning of the Tanya, I think it might be in chapter 1. At the end of chapter 1, it talks about how parents during their intimate relations are able to draw down specific souls for their children. Robert and Juan, did you notice this idea? You did?
Yeah.
Okay, so fascinating as it is, the Kabbalah tells us that a parent's behavior during this time actually influences the soul that they bring down. And so it's easily understood that if a great tzaddik is drawing down a child, they are going to draw down a child that is more in fitting with their own standard. And I say this with absolute respect, and of course, the idea that all of us present are very, very low standard in comparison to these greats. We're talking about, tzaddikim. In fact, about the Alter Rebbe, I should have said this earlier. It says that their souls, his soul was brand new. It had never been brought onto earth ever, which is a fantastic thing because that never happens otherwise. But that's something that the Baal Shem Tov said, that a brand new soul was being cultivated and made ready to come onto earth. And when he was born, when the Alter Rebbe was born, the Baal Shem Tov said that this was with regard to the Alter Rebbe. So each Rebbe they come from a place where we couldn't dream of attaining, and perhaps that's what makes them so much more unique than us, because they come from a place of much greater spiritual height, where we could never attain. And that's why, by the way, when you'll get to it, it might actually be chapter 1. I'm not sure, but it might be in chapter 1. It says in Tanya that it kind of intimates that you can't even dream of becoming a tzaddik. You can only dream of being a Beinoni. It says you should be lucky to be a Beinoni. Why does it say you should be lucky to be a Beinoni? Because that's a super high level in and of itself, right? Everybody else, that's us. We're the rest. Being a Beinoni, that's like, wow. Being a tzaddik, it feels so distant that it's amazing to meet someone who's been there. But this was, as we say, this was the great Rebbes of our community. Okay, we will take a break on the conversation of the Chabad dynasty, and we will definitely come back to it one day. I don't think it's going to wait till next year, the eve of 24th of December. It might come sooner. But in the meanwhile, I wish everybody, you are welcome. I'm happy to share with everybody everything I have. So thanks for joining the class. Find the class on your Facebook feed and share it with friends and family. Spread the word about what we're up to. And most importantly, it's now that I've taught you what Chabad is all about, or better said, now that I've shared with you what Chabad stands for, it's time to engage in some kind of Chabad practice. So after all of our conversations tonight, take out that proverbial coin in your pocket and distribute it. Do an act of kindness, do a good deed, and to someone else. How's that? Okay. Shabbat Shalom to everybody and all the best. Bye-bye.